Thank you, Dr. Alok, for such a nice CME. I will request Dr. Daljit Kaur, who is a cardiologist at AIG Hyderabad, and will be delivering talk on integrated management of atrial fibrillation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Alok, sir, for the respect, and it's a very nice meeting. Thank you for calling me. So we'll talk about how to do integrated management of atrial fibrillation by seeing the different case scenarios, different kind of patients with atrial fibrillation. So first is your regular patient who's 70 years, who's having CAD in the past, hypertensive, hypothyroid, which is well controlled over many years, Parkinson's well controlled, OSA on CPAP, benign prostatic hypertrophy, normal systolic function, normal BMI, and initially paroxysmal AFib, now persistent since 2 years. This is the first case scenario, and I would just like to highlight the list of the drugs this patient is on, and out of that, at one time point, he is at least on 4 antiarrhythmic drug. This is a next case scenario we all see in our OPD. Rheumatic patient, post MVR, chronic persistent AFib of 4 years, now admitted with the severe LV dysfunction, NYHA class 4 in, this is not moving, video is not moving. So NYHA class 4, EF of 20%, attempted cardioversion fail. You can see LA size of 5.8, atrial fibrillation is going on. Third case scenario, COPD patient. So other structural heart disease, diabetic hypertensive, AFib of 5 years, COPD. This was admitted with us during COVID time, COVID pneumonia on ventilator, and AFib with fast ventricular rate, was in cardiogenic shock on multiple drugs, and EF was just 30%. This is the third case scenario. Now how do we manage this patient? There's a fourth case, young female, 42 years, middle-aged, shortness of breath, AFib, no comorbidities, normal BMI, diagnosed as lone atrial fibrillation. Fifth case scenario, inherited cardiomyopathy, commonest is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy with the ESC score of 5%, and then she's having atrial flutter, atrial fibrillation, and DC cardioversion done. She reverts to sinus, again goes back to atrial fibrillation. So when we talk about atrial fibrillation, in short, always remember that management of comorbidities is very important. Management of precipitating cause is very important, whatever it can be. And then management of, for example, hypertension, ACE, ARB, MRI, this is RAS to inhibit the RAS system is important. Decreasing the weight, treating sleep apnea, because sleep apnea is undertreated in these patients, it's very important. And there is a data, very good data on that. If you do a targeted therapy, like you treat all the comorbidities, aggressively control the weight, control diabetes, hypertension, and then or treat only AFib, the outcome is far better if you treat the comorbidities. And that's the same thing. If you follow this ABC score, like start anticoagulation if indicated, treat the symptom better, do rhythm control at the earliest, treat the comorbidities, treat the substrate. If there is uncorrected valve disease, treat it at the earliest. There is a mortality benefit, and there is a drastic improvement in all the complications we are aware about related to atrial fibrillation. And we always ignore atrial fibrillation when it is in the paroxysmal stage, correct? Because symptoms are not much. And there is a good data, as this AFib progresses from paroxysmal to permanent, the mortality increases, survival decreases. So we should be aware about this. This is because AFib begets AFib, and we all should have, unless contraindicated, a low threshold to do DC cardioversion. I think this is underutilized therapy in atrial fibrillation. And when you talk about DC cardioversion, it's not only therapeutic, it has diagnostic purpose. Because if there is no untreated cause, and if you attempt to cardiovert and it's not reverting, your outcome of catheter ablation or cryoablation, whatever, it may not be good. So it has diagnostic importance also, because you can go to another therapy, which I'll be talking about. And if you talk about non-pharmacological management, that pulmonary vein isolation is class 1A recommendation across all the guideline, whatever guideline you pick up. If unless there is a precipitating cause which is untreated, it's a class 1A recommendation. And it has superiority in terms of survival, quality of life, improvement in AFM, reduction in heart failure hospitalization. So this, now let's go to our cases. The first case, which was old patient, no untreated cause, he took for cryoablation, and you do pulmonary vein isolation. This is left superior pulmonary vein, left inferior, and it's like, I think it's a very easy job because you go to 4 pulmonary veins, just freeze and thaw, and while you're doing pulmonary vein isolation, you get a very good isolation, and this gray says that all the connections are gone and persistent AFib has been terminated into sinus rhythm, and you decrease the number of drugs, decrease the number of heart failure hospitalizations. So there is a very good data in the patients who are not having structural heart diseases or not having other system disease involvement. How do you manage patients who are having a bad structural heart diseases or comorbidity? Do we think about perfect rate control? And what is the definition of perfect rate control? I think all of us have seen these kind of patients because at one time point their heart rate will be very slow. And when you do halter and then suddenly it becomes very fast, which is called irregulopathy. You cannot treat irregulopathy with any medical therapy, any medicines. That's why there is no mortality benefit. You pick up any drug because you can control the rate, but you cannot take care of irregulopathy, which causes inadequate filling or inadequate emptying. So why heart failure happens in atrial fibrillation? Fast ventricular rate, you're giving drugs. Second component, we don't discuss much about irregulopathy because each beat is irregular. So if it is irregular, it's irregular emptying, irregular filling, and you're not treating hemodynamics. Third is loss of atrial kick. And what is the amount of atrial kick? It's 1/3. And the patients with HFpEF, patients with restrictive physiology, HCM patients, stiff heart, it's 1/4. Right? So imagine, can I take care of these two components and then patient will improve without doing the rhythm control? That's where your pace and ablate strategy comes. So you do some conduction system pacing in the patient. You can see heart rate is very fast. You have done a nice narrowing of the QRS conduction system pacing. And once you do AV junction ablation, and then patient's rates get control. Now, if I'm talking about pace and ablate, why this atrial lead? I'll talk about this atrial lead. This is my patient with rheumatic heart disease. We always say LA more than 5 patient will not come to sinus rhythm. This is a patient, this was done in 2017. And this patient, A pacing 76%, V pacing 99%, you can see the QRS, LA is still dilated, still patient is in sinus. Because once you take care of two first components, you have improved the hemodynamics. The patient who are never coming to sinus rhythm by 6 to 8 weeks can come to sinus rhythm unless and until untreated valve involvement is there. This is already a published data. I'm doing work on this since last 4 years. And in this I want to highlight, this is all chronic persistent AFib of more than 5 years. In this series, I want to highlight two things. One, only cardioversion over 1 year, more than 30% were maintaining sinus rhythm. They didn't need further intervention. So we are underutilizing cardioversion. Second, when you do pace and ablate strategy, if you come here, the patients who were never coming to sinus rhythm, after 6 to 8 weeks, they came to sinus rhythm and you are getting atrial kick as well. And these are not the low risk patient. They are all, you can see mean age of 56 years, mean duration of AFib 5 years, and 85% has some or the other valve intervention done, 6% untreated, uncorrected valve disease because of some or the other reason, patient not willing or very high risk patient. This is one of the patient in whom sinus rhythm achieved conduction system pacing. I want to highlight the only antiarrhythmic in her prescription is Enderal. There is no amiodarone in the prescription, which we know the side effects of the amiodarone. Going to next, when we have uncorrectable comorbidities like the third case who are having COPD, CKD on dialysis, interstitial lung disease, that means I cannot eliminate the substress. So that patient in COVID emergency 2 AM we did conduction system pacing, we did AV junction ablation, this is the QRS. After 15-20 days discharge, EF became normal. After that, never got hospitalized in the This is a blessing for this patient. There is already a data, it's on the utilization of either conduction system pacing or CRT, and there is a mortality benefit in these group of patients. Coming to the fourth patient, which we are thinking about lone atrial fibrillation. Young female, there is nothing called lone atrial fibrillation. If there is a disease, there must be a reason for it. I didn't do anything, I just asked the family history. Brother had SC at 27 years of age, paternal grandmother died in early 20s. Why this should happen? It's a structurally normal heart patient. You do MOGIS, read about this MOGIS in detail. You do MOGIS, this patient, when I did genetic, it's an autosomal dominant pattern. They said it's a KCNQ1 mutation. And they said it's a short QT disease. I'll go back to this. And there is a data on. So KCNQ1 causes short QT2. But if you go back, she has a long QT. She's not having a short QT. So you need to go in detail what they have done. So it's not a short QT, it's a long QT. I spoke to them. Now, what happened? KC and Q1 or long QT1 happens because of loss of function mutation. Whereas short QT happens Q because of a gain of function mutation in KC and Q1. So it's a wrong report. Because if I diagnose it as a short QT, I'll give quinidine, which is contraindicated in long QT. So here the treatment is, because it's a long QT1, the treatment is beta blocker. For AFib, the treatment is maxilitine. And the patient's improving with the utilize. So drug treatment is important. Fifth case, interatrial delay. HCM is known to cause interatrial delay between the tricuspid and the mitral valve. So if you resynchronize atria, we talk about resynchronization of the ventricle or conduction system pacing for the ventricle. Here I'm talking about conduction system pacing for the atria. So atrial kick is important, right, in HCM, because so if you have interatrial delay or the base syndrome, if you resynchronize the atria, if you do Bachman bundle pacing in the patient, you can see that P wave has narrowed down. This is before, this is after. And not only that, it has improved all the parameters in the patient. Just a simple Bachman bundle pacing, start pacing atria, start antiarrhythmic drugs in the patient. So my key points here is treat underlying precipitating causes aggressively, including comorbidities. Try for early rhythm control as far as possible. If there are no comorbidities, pulmonary vein isolation or catheter ablation is a better approach than only giving antiarrhythmic drugs. AFib less than 40 years, no comorbidities, please search for underlying cause. Don't treat it just like a lone atrial fibrillation. Just an extra history may be helpful. If there are uncorrectable comorbidities, can consider pace and ablate strategy. Patients with CRTD, already they have CRTD, you can do AV junction ablation to achieve a good bi-V pacing. And if your patient, specifically of rheumatic heart disease, having atrial fibrillation, going for any surgical correction, please talk to your surgeon and tell them to do MACE, at least pulmonary vein isolation, and CTI, that is cavotricuspid isthmus ablation, so that AFib and CTI dependent flutter should not happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. My question is, what is your strategy in rheumatic heart disease with atrial fibrillation? Means rheumatic and non-rheumatic are slightly different patterns. So what is your strategy in rate versus rhythm control in rheumatic?
You should read my paper. Yeah. It's already published. I'm working on second paper. So any patient comes with rheumatic heart disease, first I say I make it sure that there is no uncorrectable, like stenosis is not treated. First you make it sure. Once you're sure that there's no uncorrected cause is not there, I tried for pharmacological cardioversion. I keep my page wide. Whatever is the LSIs, I'll attempt for pharmacological cardioversion. My 10% of the patient reverted to sinus rhythm with pharmacological, and here I'm not talking about amiodarone. I'm talking about using class 1C drug. Flecainide is easily available. Only thing is baseline QRS should not be wide when you are giving flecainide. Usually rheumatic med QRS is not wide. Second is you can use sotalol, which is a very good drug apart from amiodarone, they revert. Make it sure patient is well anticoagulated because they'll develop stroke, because once it's a rheumatic, it's AFib, patient needs oral anticoagulation, no Chadwick score calculation is required. So if they don't revert, then I electively cardovert them. And if I do cardioversion, if they have a 2 recurrence within 2 months, then I advise them the next stage of therapy, either ablation or the pace and ablate strategy. Older patients, more than 65, 70 years, if LA is really huge, there is a moderate to severe TR, which you won't open that, you won't do surgery for that. There is a mild AS is going on, mild AR is there. We know because rheumatic doesn't involve single valve, right? So that is not corrected, but that does cause hemodynamic abnormality. Those I go directly for pace and ablate strategy. So I have now more than 50 patients. I'm writing the second paper on that, which are doing very good once you do pace and ablate strategy. I agree you're making them pacemaker dependent, but the only thing is once all these things fail, then only you go to pace and ablate strategy.
Okay, and another question is, what in your practice, what is the failure rate of pulmonary vein isolation at, let's say, 1 year? What percentage of patients?
You're talking about non-valvular atrial fibrillation. Yeah. If you use, now there is a very good technology, new technology is got, which is called close protocol. 90%, more than 90%, they have, even if you take them back to lab, your PVs are already disconnected. They are not. So the outcome is very good if there are no uncorrectable comorbidities.
Okay, thank you. If there is another question,
Paroxysmal AF. If you talk of paroxysmal AF, suppose we advise halter to some patient for some other indication, searching for bradycardia or tachyarrhythmia or something else, and in a 80-year-old male, I detect episodes of 1 or 2 episodes.
I understood
of
where you are
paroxysmal AF.
going.
So, how should we be approaching
How
to
aggressive
this?
you should be. I understood. So the data says if you have a AFib of more than 6 minutes and on the halter you are clear it's AFib, because sometimes you are not sure. Because if it's irregular, able to see, you are clear it's AFib. If it's more than 6 minutes, if CHADVA score is more than equal to 2, treat it like an atrial fibrillation, start anticoagulation and drugs as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur.
Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. Just one question. You have talked about the pace and ablate strategy, in which recommendation is a bit different. You can go for CRT and ablation, and nowadays conduction pacing with ablation. So nowadays, which strategy you are choosing right now, and practically which one is better?
I think it's important question. Why pace and ablate strategy was backseated? Because we are doing RV pacing. So if your LV dysfunction significant is not there, if RV is not much dilated, I go for just single lead and I go with the open mind. So I'll go with the conduction system. If my QRS is narrowed down, I'm very happy. I'll not put the LV lead. If my QRS is not narrowed down, I'll do conduction system also and I'll do LV lead also. But few patients comes with very severe, like 20% EF and all. This guy, we were very lucky. He was non-affording. We did conduction system. He became completely normal. And it opened Pandora's box for us actually. So I realized that these can go normal. So I became more aggressive thinking that, so what I do is in the lab, we charge CSP and CRTP same cost. Because we do a lot of devices, we can do that. So if on table I have to convert it into CRTP, patient's costs won't go up. But 80% and I end up putting only dual chamber pacemaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur.